just a short film today, as well as working on the Austin over there with the headlights. I've also been working a little bit on the Riley. So today I machined down the mounts for the front shock absorbers. So the shock absorbers use these special pins, and when you buy these, you can buy them machined, fully machined, or you buy these unfinished ones, which are just still on the end of the hex bar that they're made from. And that's so that you can adjust them to suit your car. So I had to measure the distance between the top of the shock absorber here and the chassis rail and machine it so that that stud will fit in there. And then after machining it down, you cut a thread on there. It's a 1/2 inch BSF thread. So I just used my little lathe there to machine the thread on it. I think I've mentioned this before, it's a little bit fiddly on this lathe because I don't have a threading dial. So it means you have to engage the half nut and then never disengage it while you're cutting the thread. You have to run the tool in, stop, pull the tool out, run it back in, and you keep doing that basically. And then I clean up the thread with a die just to get it nice and neat. And it doesn't look like it, but I put these in my little zinc plating bath. So these have had a coat of zinc put on them and then just polished with a brass brush, which makes it all shiny. So I'm going to go ahead and put these on the car to get the front shocks mounted now. So this shows the front shocks mounted on the chassis now. You can see how this stud acts as a kind of standoff to get this the right distance away from the chassis rail. So that's pretty much where those go. It's worth noting that these castellated nuts that go on the end here are sort of special nuts. You can see they've got a sort of acorn shape to them, and that taper on there is to keep this bush inside the shock nice and tight. So these are sort of rubber bushes inside here with a steel insert. So like most cars, when you're setting up the suspension, you don't want to tighten any of their suspension components, the shock absorbers or anything like that, until you've got the car actually down on its wheels with all the weight on it. You leave all these loose, and then you only tighten them up at the end when all the weight's on it in the correct position, so that these rubber bushes are locked in the correct position for when the car's on the road. So all that'll be done up tight later. I'll probably end up bolting these on hard and then painting the chassis with these in place. I don't think they were separate. I think it was all kind of put together and then painted and then all these sort of bits put on. I'm not really sure. But just like this cross member, it's all been primed, so all the bolts and everything are painted. But that's a long way off, so I'll worry about that when I get to it. The other thing I've been looking at is the handbrake mechanism. This piece here, this is actually the adjuster for the foot brake. It's missing the little tap handle, these are called. These are the adjusters. So the brakes on the 9 are cable operated. At least the front brakes are always cable operated. And on some lines, the rear brakes are operated by rods. I think the original Brooklands used rods. I need to check that. Or else some of them used the cable, and it's one cable that sort of loops backwards and forwards around this complicated mechanism here. So this piece here, this is for the foot brake. So there's a rod that goes forward to the pedal, and when you push on the foot brake, this moves forwards, and this is basically all tied together, so that all moves as one. This piece here, I can't easily get it off, with these two plates, this is wrong on this car. So I'm not sure if somebody's made these or if it's two halves that don't match up. But the way this should work is you've got the shaft there, look here, which is attached to the handbrake lever. These two plates should be handed. So there's one that goes around that shaft, there's a nut that goes in there, and then you can see this one should have a hole big enough so that it runs on the end of the shaft there. So obviously having these ones, I know what they like, what the shape is and how big they need to be, so I'll probably just make some of those up out of steel to make them correct, and then I can start looking at cleaning up some of this brake mechanism. The last thing I've done is I've ordered the rebuild kits for the ball ends that go on the end of the tie rod and the drag link. I don't have the drag link yet. I have got one, but it's in the UK. The spares department supplies a kit to rebuild all of that, so I've got one of those on order. I may just paint the ends now since I'm remembering to do it, and that'll be good because then I can tie the two stub axles together and not have them sort of flopping around. But that's about it on the Riley. That wasn't a big job to get those front shocks on, but just little bits and pieces like that. You do little things when you can, and eventually you get there. These tie rod ends are quite interesting. So there's the steel housing, and there's this sort of brass bush thing that pushes into them, and this is the ball, and the ball drops in through there, and there's a little cup that sits on top, and then a little spring, and that's what puts the tension on it. And then you've got your dust cap there, and this is a little locking ring that just locks this in place. The interesting thing is the kit will come with all the new bush pieces and new balls, because you can see this one is all rusty. So the interesting thing to note about these is, one, they're on an angle, and these two are the tie rod ends, and you can see that they've got, one's got standard thread and one's got reverse thread, and the tie rod bar itself, one end is actually reverse thread, so you can see that's going in reversed. So the other end will be standard thread, and I'm guessing that's just so that you can unlock these clamps and actually adjust the toe in by rotating this bar. So if you had the same thread on either end and you just tried to rotate the bar with these locked in position, it's just going to move backwards and forwards. So you need the opposite thread on it, so when you rotate the bar, it shortens the distance between these two ends. I don't know which way round they go. If the reverse thread side would go on, would you put the left hand thread on the left hand side of the car and the right hand thread on the right hand side of the car? Does it matter? I'd have to think about that. I wonder if that means if you rotate the bar one way and you've got it one way round, does that, if you rotate it that way round, does that increase the toe or decrease it? I don't know which way round is the correct way, or if it matters. But reverse thread. Okay, that's a bit tricky to get out with one hand. But you can also notice this is on an angle. It's not flat. So where the joint is here, this is also on an angle. So it's not horizontal. It's actually tipped down a little bit. So when that's sitting on there like that, it becomes more horizontal. It's a bit hard to see from this angle. So the interesting thing is there's also one of these on the end of the drag link, and it looks like that would be this one, because the angle is the other way around. So if you look at this, the ball fits in that way, and you can see if this is flat, this is angled up. I believe on the what they call the tiller rod, which is the drag link from the steering box, it's angled the other way. And I think these castings are the same, just flipped upside down. And if you look in the parts book, this is this piece here, you can see they've got tie rod eye right hand, tie rod eye left hand, but there's nothing here for the tiller rod. So I'm assuming it's just another one of these, but with the bush in the other way up. So that's something else I'm going to have to check, but that would make sense because the drag link, or the tiller rod as they call it, has to go from here down to there, the arm on the steering box. So it does have to angle down, I guess. So that'll go like that. It's a different sort of joint on this end. It's a different arrangement on that back end. So I've got the kit that I'm getting is 2 of the tie rod ends and 1 for the rear end of the tiller rod. Actually, I better check that I don't need. I think I've ordered 3 of this end, hopefully. The other thing that's a bit strange is you can see this pin. This is a spare one. I believe this is... which way around is this going? This is angled down, so this is a spare tie rod end one. You can see the pin on this doesn't have a groove in it. And you can see that in the parts book. There are 2 different sorts of pins. One has a groove and one doesn't. So this is one with a groove. But I can't figure out what that groove's for. So there is a hole in there, and there's a little hole in the end there. So you can sort of lubricate inside there, but unless I'm missing something, which is quite likely, I don't understand why that needs lubrication, because that's a tapered pin. So when that tapered pin is pushed into here, or into there, and the nut done up, that's supposed to be tight. So that doesn't rotate. So why you would need to lubricate it, I don't know. Unless it's to make it so it doesn't seize up in there. It just seems a little bit odd. So looking at this, that groove does match. It looks like when this is in there, that little hole on the edge there will go down into the groove. So I don't know, maybe it's so you can spray something in there when you need to get them apart. These days I just use anti-seize on everything, so I wouldn't expect that to seize up anyway. It's just odd. Apparently the ones that the spares provide are these ones with the groove on them. So it's just another one of those odd little things. But hopefully when the kit arrives for these, I'll paint these ends up. I may do that now, as long as I can remember which one's which, but like I say, I think it just depends on which way up you put the bush. And then when the kit arrives, I'll rebuild those, and I can get that tie rod attached. I must be getting tired, because it's taken me a little while to sit down and figure this out in my head about which end of the tie rod, which threaded end needs to go on which side of the car. And as far as I can tell, the only difference it'll make is whether rotating this tie rod, when everything's loose, forwards, and by forwards I mean that direction, looking from this side of the car, forwards as the tyres go round, will affect the toe in or the toe out. So if you have it with the conventional thread on this end and the reverse thread on that end, if you imagine it's like this nut and bolt, this is the tube, so that goes across. If you imagine rotating the tube forwards, the amount of thread here is going to get longer, which makes this bar longer across the car. What that will do is push that stub axle that way, and the other stub axle there that way, which will increase the toe in. So if you've got the conventional thread this side and you rotate this bar forwards, you'll increase toe in. If you imagine it the other way around and you had the right hand thread on this side of the car, then if you rotate oops, stick to my magnet. If you rotate the bar forwards, you can see the amount of thread here is getting less, so the bar would get shorter. And of course the opposite will happen. If you make the bar shorter, this will come in that way, which makes this stub axle go that way. On that side of the car it'll go that way, so you increase the toe out. So as far as I can tell, that's the only difference it would make. It's whether rotating this bar forwards increases your toe in or your toe out. If you actually find another nut, I've got boxes and boxes of things everywhere, parts. I'm sure I had another 8mm nut somewhere. Oh, there it is. But if you imagine the two nuts on there, the reason you need the reverse thread is if you imagine this is your threaded tube, your drag link, those are joined together. If you've got the same thread on both ends, if you rotate those together, you don't get any change in length. All you're doing is lengthening one side and shortening the other. So you can see, if you look at the amount of thread there compared to here, if I rotate those around, this one got shorter and this one got longer, which means the overall length won't change. That's why one of them needs to be reversed. If you've ever played with a turnbuckle for doing tightening wires, you'll see how that works. The turnbuckle has a standard thread and a reverse thread, so that when you turn the middle off it changes the length of the overall thing. Sometimes I need to just sit down and actually model things up like this, or play with nuts and bolts and bits and pieces, so I understand mechanically what's going on. Like I say, I don't think it actually matters, it just changes the direction. And that's just to adjust the toe. Once you've adjusted it, you lock everything down so nothing's moving anyway. I finally managed to get the 3 of these apart to get the bushes out of them, and it turns out that's not so easy. You'd think you could just press them out, but the problem is, as you can see on this one, this bush is pretty much flush with the outside of the casting. So to be able to push that out, you would need to rest that on something, so there's a hole where the bush can get pushed into, and then you'd press down on this. But there's no way to do that. So what I ended up having to do was I put these into my little toaster oven and heated them up just to about 150 degrees, I think it was. And then I was able to put these into the vise like that with the soft jaws, so I didn't damage the thread, and basically drop the ball back through and then hammer on that using a little drift, knock on the top of the ball to be able to push these out. And you can sort of see on the ones I've removed that they're a very tight fit. The kit will come with replacements of these. It's best to just replace everything apparently. So I have the 3 that I'm going to use soaking in the evaporust just to clean them up a bit. Maybe time to replace that because that's looking pretty grubby. But then I can paint those up, and then when the rebuild kits arrive, I can push the new bushes into them. Pushing the bushes in won't be a problem because you've got this lip here. So what you can do is, on the press, you use a little spacer, or often I use something like a socket, sort of like that, and then either in the vise or on the press, you just press that bush into there. So putting them back together shouldn't be as difficult as taking them apart. I just have to make sure I get them the right way out, because obviously with this angle you need to make sure you get the bush in the right way around, otherwise it's not going to work too well. But that'll be a job when they arrive.